And welcome to the Transforming Chaplaincy Strategic Webinar Series. My name is Gila Rajai. I am your host today, and we'll be talking about trends in spiritual care departments, specifically looking at the 2018 CHA and NACC Spiritual Care Survey. And for those who aren't familiar, the CHA is the Catholic Health Association of the US, and the NACC is the National Association of Catholic Chaplains. Before we get going, I just want to give you some heads up of some things that are happening in the next bit. One, Transforming Chaplaincy continues as we work to develop research networks. And so you can look up more information and pay attention to things on the Transforming Chaplaincy website, finding our research networks. We have 6 of them beginning, and you can find, again, more information on the Transforming Chaplaincy website. We also are continuing to have online research literacy courses. One is started already, but we have more that will begin. Again, go to the Transforming Chaplaincy website. And lastly, ongoing is the APC Webinar Journal Club. The next webinar is on Tuesday, October 29th from 1 to 2 Central Time. The topic will be Beyond Either Or, Maintaining Chaplaincy Values in Outcome Research. And there'll be more information on the 2020 webinar Journal Club series, which is titled Chaplaincy, the Frontier, Innovation and Takeaways. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up of some of the things that are going on in the Transforming Chaplaincy world before we begin today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about, again, the trends in spiritual care departments. I'll do a quick introduction to our presenters and our respondents. And our presentation, again, is coming from 2 individuals, one from CHA, one from NACC, David Lichter and Brian Smith. Our response comes from Lex Tartaglia. Sorry about that, Lex. We'll end with a Q&A time. And there is, if you look at your Zoom and go somewhere near one of the toolbars, you'll see something that says Q&A. You're welcome at any time during the presentation to type in your question there. And as time allows, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. These slides and the recording of this presentation will be on the ACPE website afterwards, so you will be able to use it or see it again. It may take a little bit of time to be able to get that on the website, so be patient, but it will be up there. Thank you. Now, to introduce our presenters, first I'd like to introduce David Lichter. He is the Executive Director for the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, and joining him is Brian Smith, who's the Vice President of Sponsorship and Mission Services for the Catholic Health Association of the United States. We are lucky today to also have Lex Tartaglia from Virginia Commonwealth University, where he serves as the Senior Associate Dean of the College of Health Professions and the Catherine Lance Professor of Patient Counseling. He is also an ACP educator and was one of the supporters of the Transforming Chaplaincy Project in terms of being one of the original team. So we're lucky today to have all these folks with us. And at this point, I'm going to transfer us over to Brian and David, who are going to give us a little bit more information about what they have to share today.
Thanks, Gila. And we'll call up our slides now. So there's our bios if you're of interest. And David, I'll let you start with the background to the survey.
Yeah. Brian, the share screen, we don't have it yet.
Okay, well, try this again.
Yes. Should not be other screen. Yes.
How about now?
Not yet, Brian.
When you go back to your other slide and go back to share, should be able to find it down there. And then just hit presentation at the bottom.
There we go. Click that. Click it. Nope. Just one single click. Go back.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
The menu up here. No. Click the green. There we go. Click. Single click. Share screen. through your slide now.
How about now?
Looks great.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Brian.
Had to have my IT person come in.
That's great.
All right, David.
So great. Well, we are very glad to be with you. Brian's in St. Louis and I'm in Milwaukee. And I'm going to provide you a little background initially on the survey itself to give you a little framework of how it originated, and it's a little bit of history. Actually, CHA and NACC have been conducting almost every 10 years a survey on spiritual care. They actually go back all the way to 1988. 1997, we did one, and then in 2008, and then again now this one in 2018. We, this time though, worked with CARA, and let me just provide CARA is the Center for Applied Research on the Apostolate. It's a Georgetown University affiliate, an applied social science research center, its own nonprofit, and has done a lot of work in the Catholic arena. And CHA had used CARA at other times for doing research, so we felt comfortable approaching them. And it was good because the 2008 and the 1997 surveys were both done internally by us. We certainly had some very sound questions that we provided both in 97 and 2008, but CARA really helped us to more refine what we had decided wanted as outcomes. And so we appreciate very much CARA's guidance and involvement in this study. We did also, though, engage what is the CHA Pastoral Care Advisory Committee. This is a group of representatives from different Catholic health systems that for the last 8-9 years has been a source of wisdom and guidance for both CHA and NACC. The Pastoral Care Advisory Committee, we use the language pastoral care just out of the framework of the Judeo-Christian tradition of the Catholic healthcare, knowing that it connotes the healing ministry of Jesus, it connotes the ethical sensitivities of dignity and destiny of the human person, holistic care, and kind of the framework of community care that we see within Catholic healthcare. Although this is called a spiritual care survey, because we recognize very much we're attending to the spiritual needs of all. And so we appreciate very much the involvement of Pastoral Care Committee in this process. And we were generally pleased with the result. 32% of the spiritual care workers and 50% of the directors of spiritual care. And I'll explain a little bit more on the next slide what those two designations are referred to. So this was in 2018 when it was done, but we started much earlier than that. Late in 2017, we began to determine we wanted to do this together, CHA and NACC. In January of 2018, the Pastoral Care Advisory Committee met and helped us focus on the areas that we wanted for this particular study. And then in the spring of 2018 and in summer, we worked with CARA to actually design the survey. They helped us look also at the 2008 and 1998 surveys to make sure that where there could be correlated questions that we could carry over, great. Where we felt we couldn't, we didn't. And so we appreciated the work of CARA in helping us do it. It was in fall of 2018 when we actually did the survey. And then it was in the winter and spring of 2019 when we reviewed the preliminary findings with the Pastoral Care Advisory Committee, asked again for CARA to do a little bit more cutting of data around two particular things. We wanted to make sure that those who replied, which we called spiritual care workers, they included both those who were overseeing spiritual care departments and staff. And so what we try to do is provide a dual survey, one that we centered on everyone who was involved, and then ones who were department heads who could provide more information on kind of information that we needed directly from those spiritual care department heads. So you'll see as we go through this survey, we'll designate which data is from everyone, which data is strictly from staff profile, and then things that were provided to us by the directors of the department. It's helpful for you to know that. Also, this September, October 2019 Health Progress, so you can actually go to CHA USA website is click on Health Progress and look at the September-October issue of Health Progress. There's an article there that provides much more in depth on the results of the survey. You can do that, as well as CARE also has a special report this fall. So it's a little bit on the background. And so first survey was to everyone, to all the spiritual care ministry workers, which included both mission leaders as well as chaplains. In fact, as you look at the demographic information, the next slide will show you actually who replied. So of those who replied, 46% were staff chaplains. And then we had those who were both mission leaders and directors of spiritual care, which was important for us. As you remember that first slide, it said 50% of those who oversaw spiritual care departments replied, and we had a 23% reply from those who were 32% reply from those who were spiritual care workers. So it's important to think about that. The gender was, as we would anticipate, more female than male. NACC is about 60% female, made of both of religious women as well as lay women. So this wasn't unusual. This was not unusual, the primary race. Again, diversity remains for us certainly a challenge within our healthcare environments, but this was the breakout of the reply itself. One of the things that was important for us to look at, again, is the makeup of the department. And this, again, was provided for us by the heads of departments to say, what's the makeup? We certainly wanted to know, again, what's the religious makeup, and this slide shows that about 45.6% were Catholic, 43.2 were Christian, 9.9 are other, and then 1.2 rabbi. We had data from our 1998 and 2008 studies. Our 1998 study showed about 79% at that time were Roman Catholic. Those who reported in the 2008 study were about 59%. But we realized this particular allowed us to look at it more closely because it was reported by the heads of the departments themselves. We know within Catholic healthcare to have some good mix of those who are from all faiths as well as Catholics is important. So this was a helpful data for us to look at, as well as the next slide, which again helped us to realize that more and more the chaplaincy ministry is more and more from a framework of Catholic lay ministry. 57% of our NACC members are laymen and women doing this work. And so we were pleased to see, again, the 29% makeup of other than Catholics that involve both deacons, rabbis, imams, and others. The fact that we're 17% religious, again, corresponded very much with our own data. This showed actually the education component. You'll see actually a slide going back to 1998. This was one that we were able to pretty well capture the fact that there continues to be growing professional development. We're glad to see the 77% in masters, which certainly hopefully encompasses many of those who are more board certified as well. The next slide gives another very important slide for us. It really shows the aging, and look at that closely as you view it. You'll see the blue is the 2008 study, the 2018 is the gray. And so if you just look at the 50 to 59 and the 60 to 69, we see a pretty dramatic kind of shift in aging. It shows, in a sense, the aging dimensions of our population. And so for us, we know that this is a very critical issue for us. Also, it's important for us to ask the question about retirement itself, knowing that looking out for the next 10 to 15 years, who's thinking about retiring when? And most have been in this tradition for a longer period of time, 11 years plus. It's interesting, though, to note that professed religious have served longer. It's understandable. Many of these that were there at Catholic health systems. 20 years ago, half of our members were professed religious in the NACC. Now they're down to 20, and so a lot of professed religious have worked in this for a long time. And also it showed that the NACC members had 3 years more on average work than those staff chaplains who did not indicate NACC membership. In asking the retirement trend, though, we realized that the staff chaplains who plan to retire will do so in a plan within 10 years. Half, though, somewhere between now and 10 years, which again says to us we need to prepare ourselves for a changing of the profile and population of chaplaincy itself. Again, those who were not NACC members looked at it perhaps potentially a little bit longer than those of the NACC members. Again, at least it says to NACC, we have an aging population compared to others. This was a very interesting research for us. This time we asked, what were you doing prior to healthcare? And as we think about the recruitment of future members, it was helpful for us to realize that 42% they were working in some type of parish ministry. And again, we realize that could be priests, religious, it could be clergy of other denominations who may have been involved in their own congregational life before. 31% in education. Again, that could have been clergy of other denominations, religious sisters who were involved in the work, but knowing that parish ministry, education ministry is a very important area where we find ourselves needing to look going forward. We did ask a question again about the professional training, and we are certainly within CHA, most health systems do require certified or certifiable, and this has been in the last several years kind of the norms. But it also says there's a way to go for us and making sure that those who are working in the settings are certified. We did notice, though, that it was a very small percentage of those who did not have at least 1, 2, or 3 units. Most had at least the 4 units of CP required for board certification itself. We also asked the education of Master Divinity, which again 34% do have their Master of Divinity or others. So this for us is always a challenging slide to say, all right, how do we continue as we require board certification to be able to ensure that those who are certified and certifiable, that the percentage continues to increase. We did ask about the affiliated organizations, and it does show to us that, again, these are the respondents. So 38% were from NACC, 18% APC, 13% ACPE. This is for those who replied to the survey. This is not the dimensions of those who are working in the pastoral care settings, but this gave us a little bit of a picture of who were the respondents to the settings itself. Again, the database we sent to all of the NACC members who were working in some Catholic healthcare entity, as well as to the CHA database that includes all those working in Catholic healthcare in some form of spiritual care related work. Brian's going to take over the general employment information to provide a little bit more background of what we learned here.
Thank you, David. So again, keep in mind, this is still the first survey that was completed by everyone, chaplains as well as directors, managers of spiritual care. So we asked if their facility they worked at, if they were part of a healthcare system, and overwhelmingly, you can tell, over 90% are part of a system, which certainly reflects the trend in healthcare of consolidations and affiliations. We asked them what was the percentage of the healthcare work that was performed, at what level is most of their work performed. We recognize some folks wear dual hats where they're over facility, but they may have some regional or system responsibility. But overall, 77% of the respondents indicated they were in a local setting, which would tend to indicate a facility or maybe 2 facilities. So we felt good about that. We still wanted to make sure we were getting the answers from folks who are at the bedside. We asked what type of care setting they were in, and we gave a list of them, and they could click a box, but then we also had an other category, and they could fill in. And thankfully, the categories that we had selected were the predominant areas. Acute care, palliative care were high in this. Assisted independent living, 20%. The physician clinical setting indicates the role of chaplain in physician offices seems to be expanding, which was a trend that we had been hearing, but it was good to validate that. Now, it's important to note that a person could indicate more than one area, so this is not exclusive. So they might work in an acute care setting, but also be called to a behavioral health unit, palliative care health unit, a physician office. So this is not, the percentage of your time that is spent, but just the type of care setting. We asked the basis of their employment, if they were full-time, part-time. So again, the overwhelming majority of folks who answered were full-time, and 86% for that. We then asked, we wanted to see where they spent their time, and we wanted to keep it broad in terms of, are you spending your time mostly with patients and family and staff, or where are you at? And note in italics in this question, this was answered by, this is what the staff chaplain. So we were able to filter it by all or by those who are just the staff chaplains. And that was important for this one. So for staff chaplains, those who are at the bedside, 62% of their time is spent with patients and family. About 21% doing administrative work, which would include charting and attending meetings and things like that. And then care for staff, about 17%. When we looked at all respondents initially, the amount of time that they were spending with patients and family was only 43%. And we said, yikes, that's going to raise the question of what are our chaplains doing all the time? So we filtered out the department chair, the heads of the spiritual care department, the managers, directives, realizing that they would be spending a lot more time administrating. And so we for terms of sharing the data with wider audiences, the article that was in Health Progress, we wanted to get this statistic out because it's more reflective of the staff chaplains where they're spending their time. We asked them to put in terms of the number of hours in the last week that they spent in the following activities. So this goes back to what type of setting they were in, but now this begins to drill down how you're spending your time. And as you can see, the majority, the largest period was doing spiritual care assessments and interventions, leading prayer and ritual, and then 7.8 hours administrative. And you can see it goes down. We ranked them in terms of the hours. Staff support, 3.7. And again, keep in mind, this one we filtered out. This is the staff chaplains. If I were to have all respondents up there, you're going to see less time spent doing spiritual care assessments and interventions, more time doing administrative. That group, more time doing family conferences, more time doing ethical consultation. So it did seem that the directors of spiritual care managers, they would be spending less time with patients and families, but more time doing perhaps the ethics consults, the family meetings, and the administrative pieces of the work. So we mentioned at the beginning, David mentioned that there were actually 2 surveys. So that was the first part that was answered by everyone. And then if they had indicated that they were the head of the department by whatever title they went, then they immediately were sent to some additional questions. And now this is the results of that section. So the first part was around organization. So basically we were looking for title of who manages your spiritual care department. And 49% the title director of spiritual care, and manager. Those seem to be the top 2. Spiritual care coordinator sometimes is used. So this is fairly consistent with the data that we have seen before in terms of the title of who runs your department. Who do you report to? And I would say this is especially going to be unique in Catholic healthcare. Within Catholic healthcare, the area of mission services, typically spiritual care is one of their areas of responsibility. So those departments would report up to the vice president or director of mission services. So you probably would not see this in in other type settings, but in Catholic healthcare, this is fairly typical that you would report to the person overseeing mission services. Reporting to the CEO, president, or administrator might surprise some folks, but this especially we find among CHA's members is what you find in non-acute settings, so long-term care settings, rehab, senior housing. Typically, you wouldn't have a mission leader there as well. And this is many times you have a dual role of a person who is overseeing spiritual care and mission, so they're reporting to the CEO. So just a little clarification on that. We wanted to see the staffing model that best described their department, and we ranked these, if you will, kind of with the ideal, if you will, maybe the gold standard of if resources weren't an issue. So that the leader of the department would be a board certified chaplain, and all of the chaplains would be board certified, and then perhaps some trained volunteers to supplement. You can tell using percentages at the bottom, that only describes about 15% of the respondents, how they would describe their department. Next then, a board certified leader with some board certified staff, but some non-certified staff. They might have 1 or 2 units of CPE and trained volunteers. And that was the largest category, and that has been pretty reflective of what we've heard through the years. So about 28% describe their department as that makeup. A board certified leader with non-certified chaplains and trained volunteers, 14%. And then you can see that we move into the leader of the department not being certified, having certified chaplains, 12%, and non-certified leader with non-certified chaplains and trained volunteers. That was also 28%. That was probably the biggest surprise, that, you know, over a quarter of our departments did not have anyone, you know, in their department as board certified. They might have some CPE, and that's, I think, an area that we're going to have to continue to watch in terms of if we see a shift towards hiring people without any board certification. We then asked some questions of these heads of the departments about their staff. We especially wanted to see if their staffing levels have changed. We had heard anecdotally the last couple years that pastoral care departments were being decreased in size when there were layoffs. Many times the non-revenue producing departments got hit the hardest. So we asked, in the last 5 years, did you have an increase, decrease, or no change in the FTEs, the full-time equivalents in your department? And I have to say this was a surprise for us. So 40% said no change in the last 5 years. And in fact, 26% indicated that they had increased FTEs. So it was very interesting. I think we certainly hear anecdotes of layoff, but when we looked at it as a whole, it did not bear out what we thought we would find. Now, we did ask then if, and now this is if there was a decrease, how much of a decrease? So 5 years ago, their average department, and this is the mean across all respondents, had 4.8 FTEs, and now currently 4.4. So about a 0.4 FTE reduction for those 34% that had a decrease. Okay. We wanted to drill that down and see what that was in the acute care setting. So again, if there was a decrease in your department, it decreased about 0.3 FTEs, okay, in a 5-year period. Okay. Yes, David.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, we did ask again questions regarding, you know, your organizations, and if you recall before, the respondents, there was a higher percentage of NACC, but actually the reporting by the directors of actually the makeup of the department, it showed that again, looking at an average size department, that they were kind of equal between APC and NACC who being certified, and then some from CASC and some from NACC. And we also asked the question, how long does it take to fill positions? And you can see here, getting a director, it takes several months. Within Catholic healthcare, the ethical and religious directives, Part 2 does ask that the director of pastoral care be a Catholic, and therefore trying to find certified, experienced people who can step into that director of pastoral care role is a tough one. When you ask issues around barriers, as you see here, it's a pretty high percentage of those that said it's certification. But think about the fact that these departments do require having certified or certifiable. So it certainly say, gee, it's a challenge to find those who are certified. It's a challenge to find those that have the required education. So 80% said it's either very much or somewhat the issue of certification. They require it, and therefore it's going to be the challenge that we anticipated. Certainly education and experience, having those to be met well. You do find some, though, I mean, you see down a little bit further related to salary. So 56% either very much or somewhat see it as a salary issue. You see benefits down there. There are certainly issues around even location. When you think of many of those who are board certified lay people, to move from place to place is a pretty tough challenge for them, given the salary and benefits that it is for one who's board certified. So this was helpful for us to see again the fact that the barrier can be what's required for the positions itself. We did have some questions about volunteers. We wanted to at least learn, who's training them, and who do they report to? And I was, in some ways, the department heads, as you can see, have taken much of that responsibility along with the chaplain. And then to whom they report, which is the next one. Again, many of them have it being department heads rather than chaplains to whom these volunteers would need to report. We did ask a question again around the 24/7. And we were able to look back 10 years when we asked the same question, and certainly there's a reduction in the ability to cover the 24/7 time frame that and certainly is the ideal for us to cover. We did ask, though, questions about self-care in a department and say, do we offer that within a department? And as you can see, it was a very high number that for the staff, spiritual care staff itself, that offers something of a retreat day or reflective meditative practices. And certainly offering that to clinical staff, while it may not be as many retreat days, certainly reflective meditative practices, compassion fatigue, and other type of complementary therapies is offered to the staffs themselves. We did ask some questions of standards and accreditation. One of the things that within we really urge through the Pastoral Care Advisory Committee and offer sample outlines to make sure they have standards for their spiritual care department, and its systems have spiritual care standards. And so this is good. It was good to see that 85% have that in place. We did ask a question about CPE. Again, we did have that to compare to from 2008, and there was a little bit of reduction in CP programs, which again is more of a chagrin as we continue to look at the need for more CP programs as we require board certification itself. So it says to us there's work to do around making sure there's more CP programs within Catholic healthcare itself. So Brian, I turn it over to you.
All right. The fourth part of the questions for the department leaders. We had some questions around the electronic medical record as well as how they interacted with the other members of the care team. And we used if it was effective, very effective, or somewhat. So the relationship between spiritual care department members and team and the medical team was very, very high or somewhat, so almost combined. The totality. Use of electronic medical records. So if you add those to 86% are using an electronic method of charting as opposed to paper charting. The use of the electronic medical record to communicate the patient's spiritual needs, again, being utilized by 75% of the departments. And then is the chaplain's documentation used by other members of the clinical team? That dipped a little bit, that would be 62%. So about 2/3 indicated that the notes that the chaplain center are being used by other members of the clinical team. When we asked how referrals are made to the department, some type of electronic use seems to be the major way. Phone, pager, electronic request, voicemail. Now again, they could respond in more than one category. So you saw that we saw that consistently, that typically referrals are made multiple ways, during rounding or by electronic request. How long does it take for a member of your team to answer that referral? So this was the mean of all respondents. So not quite 17 hours. So in case you're setting standards or wondering what this looks like nationally, again, this is keeping in mind these are respondents that are all settings, acute care, non-acute. So we did not filter it out by acute and non-acute. So 16 hours probably is too long in a long-term care setting. So you, again, will have to apply that to your setting. We asked the question, does your spiritual care department use a patient satisfaction tool such as Press Ganey or HCAP? Is there a spiritual care question embedded? And 60% said yes, they do have a question within their patient satisfaction survey that directly asks about the spiritual care received by the patient. So we're now going to move to the challenges, and we ask questions, and this is actually returning to all. So these were questions that were asked of everyone on the first survey. We wanted to save this to the last part of this presentation because I think a lot of this will prompt questions. I have a couple of the areas, and then David's going to finish it up. So we asked, what area of competency or skills do they personally feel they need to develop in the next 3 years? So the one category, Kara helped put this into categories. As you can imagine, there were this was all qualitative, and they had to sort through this, and they had to refine and distill this down. And so they called one area skills that would be gained through additional education, either through graduate level courses or extended type of workshops and training. So in that area, you see more training in ethics, spiritual direction, formation, CPE certification, applied research, which for this group I think is very fitting, that surfaced as they know they need to use more of the applied research techniques in spiritual care. And then a couple of the others have received fewer responses. The next category would be interpersonal skills. So this area actually David has seen through surveys he's had and through information, but many of our chaplains are feeling that they need to grow in skills that maybe they didn't get through their CPE training, through leadership development, business, finance, operations, working with other medical professions, that type of thing. So interpersonal skills, I would say, also grow into the area of competencies that maybe are beyond a traditional CP program that really would be preparing chaplains for, I would say, a leadership role as a director of spiritual care over the department. The ministry-specific skills. So then many of the chaplains, because of where they serve, might feel that they need to grow in order to serve those populations well. So certainly the NACC has a certification of chaplains program for their palliative care program. In addition, being a chaplain in a behavioral health setting, if you didn't have a lot of exposure to that in your CPE training, there might be a need. So many of this was, I think, specific to where they find themselves working, who they are serving, and that they felt that they needed additional training to develop in those skills. And turn the last couple slides over to David.
Thanks, Brian. Just to comment on that last slide, Brian, too, I would say when you think of the healthcare arena, these are certainly identifiable ones that we all look at and say are growing. Tremendously growing need from palliative and hospice care. Behavioral health is such a growing need. We're aware of in a sense, the need for more training and supports around being able to work in behavioral health settings. Elder care and end of life for sure, outpatient for sure. So I think I was glad to actually see that these were the hallmarks, because they certainly are the areas that are so much talked about and where so much more research needs to be done. The last slide has actually around the organizational challenges. We say, what's the biggest challenge facing provisional spiritual care in your organization? And these should not be a surprise to any of us, right? Given the challenges economically, the shortage around staff, feeling the staffing pressure. Certainly within the Catholic healthcare arena, because of the sacramental needs, having Catholic priests available for the sacraments. And we hear that so often, and how and in what way does the sacramental offerings can be provided. Again, if board certification is required, certified eligible, we already saw that earlier, that having qualified candidates to step in this role. I know particularly within Catholic healthcare, and I know within the Catholic arena, there's those who are board certified or board certified eligible within the Catholic arena is tough. Again, 20 years ago, we had 1,700 religious sisters. We have under 400 now. We had 800 lay. We only have about 1,100 now. So there's certainly within the framework of Catholic board certified members, it's a need for us. Budgetary constraints and lack of resources. Again, it's not dissimilar to lack of staffing. Certainly we did the Sullivan-Cotter survey with APC with, again, the support of CHA to try to look at pay scale and those issues. Training and continuing education, if it's not supported, and we find it, whether APC, NACC, or others, as we do our conference, really more and more people have to pay out of their own pocket for continued education. And certainly the advocacy for spiritual care remains for all of us as our organizations a primary advocacy need on our part. So these certainly are organizational challenges that are not surprising to us. So that being done, we went about 40 minutes, and so we want to turn it over back to Gilles, Lex, for your comments and lead us into questions.
Great. So now I'd like to ask Lex if you could give us a bit of a response on the presentation today.
Okay. Well, thank you for this opportunity. Dave and Brian, thank you for the work that you put into this and the presentation. Clearly, there's a lot here, and trying to decide what to respond to took me some thinking about how I would do that. So what I did was I looked at it within the context, try to look at this within a broader context of, how do I see this within, not related to Catholic health system, because I've never served in one, but the broader context of other settings in which chaplaincy occurs. All of my career has been in academic medical centers, 2 of which are public. So it's a very different context in a number of ways. So I selected slides that I think would look at this of interest to people that serve in wider context. The first couple have to do with the demographics. One is I was happy to see that the educational level of chaplains has continued to go up over the last 40 years and really significantly over the last 10. I thought that was important for the profession. The other demographic piece was the aging population of chaplains that are currently serving, especially with the increase of those age 60 and above. And the challenge to that, I think, is tied to some of the other things that you mentioned later on. One being the challenges of finding qualified people. So who's going to replace the people that are moving towards retirement? And the challenges, the time it takes and the challenges of finding people, both directors, I think it was up to 6 months, and over 3 months for staff chaplains when you have small staff, that leaves significant gaps in service and coverage that I think is something to be thinking about. The other thing, the last piece about demographics, which will surprise no one, and that is it certainly looks like, and this may be tied to the ages of chaplains, we have a lot of second career people. And those of us that have been involved in CPE find that as not surprising. So those are some of the demographic pieces, and maybe some folks will be able to talk about, you know, what some of the strategies are to recruit successfully. A couple of other observations. Clearly, you know, there's an increase in the diverse context and settings in which people are serving. Even though it's still 70% within acute care, the range of other settings seems to have expanded. And I wondered if you had any data, you don't have to answer this now, but I wondered if you had any data from 2008 to see whether that has changed, or some of those earlier surveys, whether there's a change from those to 2018. The other observation from one of the slides was the fact that staff chaplains are clearly involved in a range of activities. That comes as no surprise as well to anybody, but a couple of surprises I had. Oh, the one surprise I had was only 17% of their time involved in staff care. You know, our experience, and in a variety of people I've talked to, the increase in chaplaincy time with staff, and the emphasis by senior leadership for staff chaplains to support staff because of the impact of staff turnover and the cost of staff turnover, that in some instances they're even more concerned about working with staff than they are with patients and families, especially if they're doing what we might call routine calls just to meet certain metrics. So that's one thing. The other thing, you mentioned something about administrative tasks, and one of the administrative tasks that somebody mentioned was charting. I kind of would think about, and I hadn't thought about that till I was listening to you speak, I kind of see charting as part of patient care. And that kind of ties back to the information about communication in the electronic medical record. I think if we can effectively communicate what we do, what the needs of our patients are, how we're helping to be part of the team to address those, and hopefully the more effective we are at that, the more other members of the medical team will reference our notes. If that's to me, that's a bigger picture of looking at patient care as opposed to just being one-on-one patient family. There's the other thing that I noticed was the decrease in 24/7 coverage for many departments, as well as the fewer number of CPE programs. I don't know if there's a direct link, but you know, for many CPE programs, the use of CPE students enhances the breadth and the ability to provide after-hours care. And while there's not necessarily a link here, I thought that was an important connection that perhaps they're related. So the sort of other things that I'm thinking about is, given what you said, what are the challenges? I thought about your last part about challenges and opportunities. And so that's my last part. And I've got a couple of thoughts about that kind of throw out. Maybe you could respond to these. You know, one is, you know, chaplaincy are still in its infancy about demonstrating that we're health professionals. There's still some question, you know, in a lot of contexts, and ones that most of us work in, it's not an issue, but I think across the board, there's still some challenges about chaplains being understood as health professionals. And a couple of things that we do that raised that question. I happen to work in a college where everybody, all of our, with 9 other allied health disciplines, all of our students come out either, they will need certification or licensure when they come out. They can't, most of them cannot work without certification or licensure. Your data shows that we're still 46% of chaplains certified, which is less than, of those that responded, which is less than half. What are the implications of that for us as a profession? I'm not sure how, the breadth of that outside, but I think that's an important question. In particular, the 28%, which is the second largest group, are departments without a director or any staff chaplains that were certified. I think that's a challenge for us moving forward. Again, what does that say about us as health professionals vis-a-vis other professionals? And then finally, the implication, the skills that you talk about, I think have some direct implications for CPE training. We can't do everything in CPE, but I think a couple of the things that you mentioned, I think probably over the years are starting to get more and more attention for CPE training. One is a clear extended focus on clinical ethics, research, and leadership and administration, because most of us many people learned those things after they got out and did not have those incorporated in their CPE training. And I think it's important that we continue to look at that. And my last comment is, this is such a great survey. I wonder if we did something like this in a broader context and maybe looked at it within APC and, whether or not, that could be done, and see what other kind of results we get, do some comparisons. It's a great research question, I think. So those are some of my thoughts. You guys might have some comments before we open up the question.
Good. Thanks, Lex. A lot of good areas. Certainly around their demographics. Those are the ones that certainly jump out as to me as well. You asked the question if in 2008 we asked about kind of the settings. We didn't do as much with that. I think over the past 10 years we realized the diversity of settings, and so we wanted to test that. I wish we could do a comparison between 2008 and 2018, but that's one of the areas that we focused on now. Hopefully going forward we can get more information and knowledge about that. If I make a comment about the CP training, and Alex, I appreciate your article in Reflective Practice about 3 or 4 years ago, raising a lot of questions on what can CPE do and what type of partnerships could be there between health systems and CPE and organizations. I think that's a very important area still to pursue. As I looked at these challenges and opportunities, I do think there's a lot for our professional associations to look at, along with the healthcare entities as well as with CP programs. I think we could kind of use this a bit as kind of a checklist, so to speak, and say what's possible for CP to do. Where do we partner with health organizations around making sure these things can be done and covered? So I appreciate you mentioning that, and I would just put a shout out to your article again that you wrote in Reflective Practice, because I think it raised a lot of wonderful questions around the scope and ability of CPE itself. But those are a couple of things that I would comment on. Brian, you might have other comments.
Because that's probably also my greatest concern is this shift towards departments with no board certified chaplains being led by someone without board certification. So if that trend continues, I think we're going to be in problem. And to me, it does speak to still the acceptance of spiritual care as a profession. I mean, we wouldn't think of our nurses, nurses not being RNs or LPNs, and chief nursing officer, we wouldn't think of them, directing nursing without a nursing background. So I think we have to help our colleagues, we have to continue to raise this. That having been said, we're having a hard time recruiting, getting qualified candidates because of how much is required and then at the pay at which we're starting people. And so it's a catch-22, if you will, of how do we create the pipeline, how do we attract people to the profession so that we will continue to have board certified chaplains. And so that's why we raised, and I made a much stronger argument for this in the article that I wrote, but in terms of what do we need to do, one of the things I says we have to pay a just wage to people who were expecting a master's degree in this amount of clinical supervised hours. We're not paying what their peers with that same amount of education and training are. So just, couldn't get into all of that in terms of how I editorialize the data myself. But again, David mentioned chausa.org, click health progress. It's in the current issue in terms of some of the areas of conclusion, what we need to do included in that article.
Yeah. And Lex, I would agree with you that there's a potential for a broader survey, the use of these, and looking at a broader audience other than Catholic healthcare to see what it looks like, Catholic healthcare to others, but potentially at least get us a better picture of what the broader spiritual care world is. And perhaps this type of survey tool could be helpful to that regard.
Okay, thanks.
All right, everyone. We have about 2 minutes left before our time runs out today. We do have one question left in the queue, and so I want to ask that to all of you as quickly as possible. So could you very quickly address how you understand the marginalization of spiritual care and discernment between spiritual and religious affiliation, specifically how other chaplains address non-religious and often angry patients who clearly have needs but aren't often open to discussion? And this may not be a part of your survey, but is it something that you all considered to think about the non-religious or those who may have no affiliation in your survey or the like?
I think it showed up in two areas. One, where we were usually marginalization of spiritual care was internally, so that spiritual care is not seen as revenue producing. What's the value add? And so that sense of that was a category that CARA assigned to that. But basically, the CEO doesn't understand us. They're wondering, how do we prove our worth? So that's how they are referring, how they are seen, and that gets that professionalization of chaplain. I think the second part, in terms of dealing with patients who come from a non-religious background, that posed itself, I think, in terms of in the challenges section when people said what they need more training, education, how to deal with patients who come from a non-religious or even non-spiritual background, and yet you're still asked to come in and try to address their needs. They may not describe themselves as spiritual needs, but that's how we call them. David, would you add anything to that?
I would only add that it's an important topic for the CHA Spiritual Care Advisory Committee as well. We're so much aware in the Northwest of the percentage of population that are unaffiliated or non-religious. And so I appreciate very much the representation from around the country of those who are from systems within which there's a larger percentage of population. We learn a lot from them because they encounter every day that those who are unaffiliated. And certainly the training of our board certified members, whether it's APC or NAJC or ACP or CASC, the ability to respond to people of any faith or no faith is a really critical competency for chaplains. And so the more we learn about it, the better. I don't know if Lex, you have any other comment on that?
We might be out of time.
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
The real quick response is, I think we think about spiritual care in existential terms as opposed to terms.
Yes.
And there are fundamental existential questions that I think are part of being a human being, regardless of religion.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think our focus could be there.
Well, thank you all for being with us today. I want to give a sincere thank you to David and Brian for putting this together and presenting the information that you've collected, and to Lex for being our respondent today. Carl, who is our ACPE person who coordinates all of these webinars and makes them happen. Thank you to all of you for making that happen. Our 2020 strategic webinar series is being put together right now, and so we'll have more updates, and I invite you to check out the Transforming Chaplaincy website for more information as it comes out. You'll also find it in our newsletter. A reminder that we have just a few other things going on. We have the research networks that are developing to check out our online research literacy courses and our webinar journal club that you can always learn more about research literacy and the like. And we just thank you again. We'll let you know when our next webinar is. So everyone have a great day, and
thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.